No one can deny that, as the world's leading superpower, no single force can destroy America except itself. In the past, the prospect of a second civil war seemed distant, but now this scenario is being taken seriously. In a polarized political landscape, nearly one-fourth of respondents want their state to secede, and over 40% believe that internal conflict could occur within the next decade. Many Americans fear that this decade might see them taking up arms against their fellow citizens. But how would a war that destroys the United States from within unfold? Before we dive deeper, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our latest videos. Although the United States remains relatively stable, the risk of internal conflict still looms, as ideas that could divide the nation are increasingly discussed and amplified by the media since the beginning of 2023. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican, has called for the division of the United States into red, Republican, and blue, Democratic states, referring to it as a national divorce. She also emphasized the need to reduce the size of the federal government. Notably, Greene is not the first Republican to propose the idea of secession, a trend that has increased since the contentious 2020 presidential election. According to a June 2021 poll by Brightline Watch and YouGov, 66% of Republicans in the South supported breaking away from the United States to form a new country, while 47% of Democrats in the West shared a similar view. This has sparked concern and misunderstanding among the public, while sensationalist media have exacerbated the situation with headlines like "The Threat of Internal Collapse" and "The Second American Civil War Has Begun." Even the film industry has played a role in stoking these fears. The movie Civil War, released by A24 in 2024, depicts an America engulfed in violence between the federal government and secessionist movements, leaving many viewers worried about a bleak future. Additionally, books like How Civil Wars Start by Barbara F. Walter and The Next Civil War by Stephen March have provided deep insights and thought-provoking perspectives on the possibility of a second civil war. The book, The Turner Diaries, has not only fueled but also radicalized racial tensions, becoming the Bible of the far right and inspiring numerous acts of violence, such as the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 and the London attack in 1999. These violent acts may foreshadow a second civil war in the United States. According to polls, 25% of Americans want their state to secede, while half believe that a cold civil war has already begun. Notably, more than half of Republican sympathizers believe that a civil war is inevitable, and 41% of Biden 2020 supporters think it's time to split the country. The deepening polarization between the Republican and Democratic parties makes compromise nearly impossible. This is not just a difference in policy, it has become an issue of identity, with Americans no longer simply supporting a political party, but seeing it as part of their identity. The media has exacerbated the situation, but it has not yet been enough to push the entire nation into an internal armed conflict. However, with the growing national divide and spreading partisanship, a bloody civil war may be unavoidable. Currently, political homogeneity in the U.S. has become so extreme that any dissenting viewpoint is deemed worthless. This binary thinking turns every disagreement into an existential threat, intensifying political polarization based on identity rather than ideology. This is a clear warning sign of an impending civil war. One crucial factor to consider is that internal conflict could erupt between two factions when one side feels its power is threatened and decides to use force to regain power in a context where the political system is seen as corrupt. This makes the 2024 presidential election a potential flashpoint. However, unlike the first American Civil War, the geographical division between the warring sides today is not clear-cut. While there are blue, Democratic, and red, Republican states, the political distribution within each state is highly diverse. For instance, Maine is typically considered a blue state, but it still has areas that support Donald Trump. Nebraska is a red state, but the city of Omaha is a blue dot. Coastal California is blue, but its interior is red. Texas, though a conservative state, still has large cities like Houston, Dallas, and Austin, which are Democratic strongholds. The 2020 election results highlighted this division. Donald Trump won in 2,588 counties with 130 million people, primarily in rural areas, while Joe Biden won in only 551 counties. This suggests that if a civil war were to occur, the conflict would no longer be a simple confrontation between states, but rather a war between communities divided along county and city lines, reflecting the complexity of the current U.S. political landscape. Even though urban populations are large, with 100.98 million people, this doesn't mean we are looking at two large armies facing off in a second U.S. Civil War. Instead of large-scale battles, the conflict would unfold in a dispersed, asymmetrical manner, with small factions bound by a common ideology. These factions can form quickly due to media and social networks, allowing small groups to self-organize without a hierarchical structure. They can assemble, disperse, and disappear swiftly, making it difficult for authorities to track them. What's more concerning is that anyone could join the conflict under the banner of extremist movements, from far-right groups like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys to far-left groups like Antifa and other anarchist collectives. The 2024 election, regardless of the outcome, could trigger a rapid increase in extremist groups, leading to the formation of hundreds or even thousands of small groups ready to engage in conflict as the spark of unrest ignites. The next critical factor in the scenario of a second U.S. Civil War is what will ignite the conflict. No one can say for sure, but one thing is clear. When the war begins, few will see it coming. According to experts, conflict often smolders long before it becomes apparent, catching even those in political power by surprise. If factions dissatisfied with the election results decide to take up arms, the conflict would manifest as sporadic violence carried out by armed extremist groups rather than a large-scale war. In fact, such acts of violence have already begun to occur, such as the attack on Paul Pelosi, husband of former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, or the attempted assassination of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Attacks like William Van Spronson's assault on an ICE detention facility in Tacoma in 2019, or Michael Raynol's killing of a member of the far-right group Patriot Prayer in 2020, are just early signs. When the war truly breaks out, these acts of violence will escalate in both scale and intensity, with political assassinations, bombings in public places, and possibly even coup attempts within the military. As a result, the conflict would spread like wildfire, plunging the country into chaos and deepening divisions. This is the scenario many experts fear for a second U.S. Civil War. Another factor that cannot be overlooked when discussing a potential second U.S. Civil War is the prevalence of firearms. With 393 million civilian guns in circulation and a population of just 333 million, the United States has the highest rate of gun ownership in the world. This means that anyone who wants to participate in the conflict can easily arm themselves. Even more concerning is that those who own the most weapons are often the ones who have already prepared for this scenario. If not ready, they can still purchase more firearms to execute their plans. With the increasing number of armed individuals and the growing aggression of factions, the risk of violence spiraling out of control is very real. Before anyone realizes it, a second U.S. Civil War could descend into pure chaos, where even the most ordinary people could become vicious. Violence could escalate to the point where entire towns might be purged and buried in mass graves. As morality collapses, the country would fall into an endless cycle of terror. Nonetheless, many experts still believe that a full-scale civil war is unlikely. They argue that although the U.S. is facing many internal conflicts, none of them are significant enough to ignite a civil war. Americans, they suggest, are more disillusioned than fanatical, more cautious than impulsive, and more pragmatic than idealistic. As such, they would not easily take up arms against their neighbors. However, history has shown that unforeseen circumstances and escalating tensions can lead to conflict, even when people are not actively seeking it. Therefore, the risk of a second civil war in the United States cannot be dismissed, even if it remains difficult to predict. However, continually discussing the possibility of a civil war could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, further exacerbating the tensions we aim to alleviate. So what do you think about this issue? Is the United States truly on the brink of a second civil war? If so, How might this conflict unfold? Do you agree with the scenarios that have been proposed, or do you have a different perspective on how this war could begin and end? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't leave just yet. The most interesting part is still to come.